Solo significa que les quiero pedir hablar un poco más despacio para poder captar toda la información. Si tienen alguna pregunta, pueden indicarlo en el recuadro del chat. Y y entonces
just to let you know, we're just doing like a little personal introduction to us, but we're gonna have you put that out when we start the event.
So I just want to encourage folks.
Winston, are you going to make me co-host so I can admit people in?
Oh, and I hear Pi talking too. Winston, you might want to.
We can't hear you.
Hey everybody, so if you're not speaking, please mute yourself, or we're gonna get a lot of feedback, especially if you don't have a headset. Sorry, say that again, please, Sue.
We can't hear Pi, that's all.
I'll unmute him, or I'll ask him to unmute. Now you're live.
There were like a little sounds, there were some sounds, but Pi, we just couldn't really hear you.
Oh, you can hear me now?
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah.
Okay, so I thought, Winston, you were going to make me call so I can admit people in?
You should be. Oh, here you go.
Yeah, just so we can start rolling in.
Okay, great.
You know, working the event with us tonight, Fiona, is Peter Miller from Taxi Workers Alliance, my colleague at United Save the Mission, Guled Mousse, Susan Vaughn, who's on the SFMTA CAC. I think you're familiar with Pyra from SDA. And then we have Caina, Joey, and Liliana, who are kind enough to lend us their services for tonight for interpretation.
Cool. Good to meet everybody.
Alrighty.
Good to meet you.
I'm gonna leave some notes in the chat for participants about formatting and expectations.
Can you turn off the waiting room? I had to sit 5 to 6 minutes.
All right, and then just for everybody who's joining, Guled and myself, Winston Parsons, we are going to be moderators, and Pi Ra of SDA is going to be our effective bouncer. So if you're speaking over other people or not making space, Pi is going to give you a heads up, and if need be, might mute you or potentially even boot you from the meeting. So just we're asking for decorum. That's all.
You're telling I'm a bouncer, okay.
Yeah, I'm laughing because, I'm laughing because I know Pi and the word got.
The antics.
All right, well, I think most of our folks have been admitted. Should we get started, Carlos?
Let's go ahead and give folks just another 10 minutes or 5 minutes just to come in, another couple minutes to come in, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Let me actually confirm what we said is the start time on. Okay. Yes. Yeah, let's just give folks about like another 2 to 3 minutes, and then we'll go ahead and get started. And just want to thank everybody for joining us ahead of time. Thank you. All right, thank you to everybody participating. Just like another minute, and we're gonna go ahead and get started here. So I'll make sure folks can jump on and be part of it for as long as they wanted to.
Silence.
It's easy to come by these days, out on the street at least. All right, it's almost 6:10 here. As soon as we get to 6:10, and it is 6:10 right now, let's go ahead and get started. Good evening, everybody. My name is Carlos Bocanegra, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to the Transit Justice Coalition's inaugural town hall discussion with SFMTA board nominee Fiona Hinze. The event this evening has two important purposes. First is providing an equitable opportunity for our communities to learn more about SFMTA board nominee Fiona Hinze, her experience in transit, and her perspectives on community questions regarding transit equity. Second is to help elevate visibility and awareness of the need for equity and justice in transit for marginalized people and communities of color, as well as essential workers living and working in San Francisco. This second reason is one that cannot be understated. For too long, communities of color and other historically marginalized communities have been denied the equitable opportunity to meet with city appointees and have their needs and concerns heard prior to appointment. We express our sincerest gratitude to Ms. Hinze for your support and courage in helping to bridge this gap and not only elevate but prioritize the voices and needs of the communities we are honored to serve. To everyone participating and watching tonight, thank you. Thank you for sharing your strength and supporting the participation of our people who for too long have been unjustly excluded from these processes. I'd also like to thank everyone in the Transit Justice Coalition and all of our participating community partners for all your work and support in making this event tonight possible. Finally, I'd like to acknowledge and provide our deep appreciation for our interpreters helping here tonight. Their work is truly equity in action and critical to creating equitable space and empowerment in our communities. I provide our heartfelt thank you to Liliana, to Joey, and to Caina for your service here tonight. Thank you so much. And with that, I'd like to take a quick moment to pause and ask our interpreters just to share sort of ground rules and ways that we're going to be able to help support their work throughout the evening. So Liliana, Joey, Caina, please take it away. Thank you.
Good evening, buenas noches. Thank you so much for being here. Muchas gracias por estar aquí. I'm going to be helping with language support in Spanish tonight. So I'm going to say the following instruction in Spanish. Muy buenas noches, gracias por estar en esta reunión sobre la justicia del tránsito que es tan importante. E igualmente valoramos la importancia del acceso y la justicia lingüística. Queremos aportar información en su idioma para poder entender los temas y hacer preguntas en su idioma también si es necesario. Quiero pedirles ahora para poder escuchar la interpretación en español, si puede ver debajo, al fondo de su pantalla, verá un icono de globo y ahí puede hacer clic y seleccionar español, va a decir Spanish, y ahí va a poder estar escuchando la interpretación simultáneamente en español. So I want to just remind folks, if there's anything that is said in Spanish and you want to hear the interpretation in English, you can go at the bottom of your screen and select English as your language by clicking on the world icon. And I want to remind everyone, please, to pace yourself when speaking, trying to keep a tempo or speed similar to mine now. If you see me pop up on the screen and do this sign here, it just means to please take a breath and slow down as much as you can so that we can catch up to you. Así es que si me ven haciendo esta señal, es nomás pedir a las personas que estén hablando que hablen un poco más despacio, respirando entre frases. Y aquí está su servidora. Muchísimas gracias. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Liliana. Joey and Caina?
Hi, Caina.
Hey. So we are on the English channel right now.
Yes, I believe so. just like any useful tips for English speakers as they're asking their questions, that would be helpful for you tonight, or other things could be helpful to keep in mind.
Or to announce in Cantonese how people can select Cantonese interpretation. Joey or Kenna, do you want to give that announcement?
I'm sure we'll get them caught up in just a second.
Okay.
Just in between, I know folks must be ready to roll with this event, but before we depart to the next segment, please just allow me to share some information and ground rules that we're going to have for this evening, just to make sure we're giving space to all of to each other and making sure that this event is truly equitable. First, folks wishing to ask a question during the community questions portion of the town hall may do so by opening the chat in Zoom and selecting one of our moderators. Thank you to Guled and to Winston. If you could both raise your hands real quick, just so folks know who to look out for. Please send them a private message, and sending them a private message with your question. Our moderators will be collecting questions from you throughout the evening. And once we get to the community question portion of segment, we'll call upon you to ask your question during our community question portion. You can also use the raise hand function on Zoom to be put in stack once the community question portion of the event has begun. Also, in order to ensure we are providing equitable
大家
deference.
好，你哋有冇聽到我講啊？可唔可以喺個 chat room 嗰度打一個字出嚟，話聽到中文啊？
Kana, hang up. You gotta select Chinese on your interpretation.
And then also in order to ensure we are providing equitable deference during this portion, if you're a person belonging to a historically marginalized community, please write in parentheses MC at the end of your question to help our moderators identify those questions that are deserving of equitable deference. And finally, for those asking questions with experience to transit, please keep your terms as common as possible, just because I know it can get complicated and we want to make it as understandable for everybody that's in attendance here tonight. Finally, just a few ground rules before we move into the rest of this evening. First, for those that are going to be asking questions, whether from an organization or during the community question portion, please introduce yourself, the organization you're representing, if any, and then provide your question. The question and dialogue has to be transit related. For those asking questions with experience to transit, please try to use the transit terms in as common language as possible. In an effort to ensure everyone in the community is heard, please be considerate of everyone's time by being as concise and to the point with your question as possible. We are asking that everybody please limit all questions to 30 seconds. We don't want to have our bouncer have to mute you. So please, if you can keep your questions to 30 seconds, as it's getting closer, we'll have a wrap-up signal that you'll see from myself or our moderators. Like this, you know you're getting close, so you might want to just close end your question as soon as possible. Again, you can use the raise hand function on Zoom to be put in stack, or open the chat in Zoom to select one of our moderators, Guled or Winston, and send them a private message with your question. This is a family-friendly event. I can't emphasize that part enough. You will be automatically muted if you use any profanities or unsafe language during the Q&A. And you're going to be receiving a warning before ejection for the following: talking over people will be a mute, not respecting question time will be a mute. And if we have to provide more than one warning or we end up booting you, just know that once booted, you will not be readmitted into this event. So let's just be considerate as possible with ourselves and with each other, please. And then also just a reminder, this Zoom town hall is being recorded. The recording will be available on the Transit Justice Coalition's Facebook page. So come visit, like us, share it with your friends afterward. That would be great. And all of that said, it's my pleasure to introduce tonight Miss Fiona Hinze and have her share her experience in transit, her goals for the SFMTA, and other information she feels important in helping the community learn more about her, before proceeding to the next question segment of the evening. So without further ado, board nominee Fiona Hinze, thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for having me, and to Winston and Gulet and our interpreters for their help in organizing this event. As Carlos said, my name is Fiona Hinze. I am the SFMTA's board nominee, or one of them, along with Manny Yucatil, who's nominated for another vacancy who you'll hopefully be hearing from shortly within the next couple of weeks. So to give you a little bit of background about myself, I am someone who uses a wheelchair. It's hard to tell that about me sometimes on Zoom. So I am a person with lived experience with disability. I am appointed, as some of you may know, the board always has, the MTA board always has a person with a disability on it to represent that community. So I was honored to be appointed. I live in the Outer Richmond district and am a user of paratransit as my main mode of public transit. For my day job, I serve as the Director of System Change at Independent Living Resource Center, San Francisco. If you're not familiar with Independent Living Resource Center, we are a cross-disability advocacy and service organization. We provide direct service to folks that are looking for help with, say, housing or benefits. But my role is really overseeing the policy side of the work that we do. That entails working with a lot of community partners in various topic areas. So we work a lot with Senior and Disability Action. So that's why I was grateful for Pi's invitation and grateful for our bouncer tonight. So delving in more to the transit side of what I do, I work very closely with the Vision Zero Coalition, and I'm a very big part of their senior and disability work group. We've undertaken projects like just designing a manual for accessible protected bikes. Oops, I'm gonna pause real quick.
Sorry, I'm gonna
Sounds
give
like
Joey a message.
interpretation issues. When we have interpretation issues, we pause and wait for those. Are we good, Winston? Or
I think so.
um,
Let's proceed, and then I think I'll manage it.
okay, just let me know if I need to pause. And also a note to our interpreters: if I start speaking too fast, feel free to interrupt me. To let me know that I was speaking too fast and you need me to stop. So I also serve on the Paratransit Coordinating Council, which is sort of the consumer advisory board for paratransit, which for those of you who don't know or might be less familiar, paratransit is a door-to-door service that is available for folks that can't take community summer all of the time. So having a user of paratransit on the MTA board would be a somewhat of a unique perspective that to bring to that. I'm also, more recently, I've been involved in the some of the tenderloin COVID response conversations. In fact, I know some of you from those this afternoon. I guess in summary, goals for the MTA is, I think, just in general, bringing a lens of senior and disability issues, and someone who can really analyze those sort of issues, and everything that the MTA does through a focus on seniors and folks with disabilities, but also other what the MTA considers communities of concern, but also making sure that, for example, in our COVID response and recovery, that we are in deciding what lines to bring back. For example, we're also factoring in areas of the city where that aren't necessarily already being served well by transit, and making sure that that's factored in. I think another goal of mine for the MTA would be to increase public transparency in getting around doing a lot of community meetings and meetings with supervisors. I'm hearing that the communication on various issues with the MTA is viewed as lacking sort of by the public. So, for example, I know that the restoration of rail and sort of why that's taking so long continues to be a mystery. For like the exact reasoning continues to be a mystery for some folks. So I guess those are some of my general goals. I know that was a lot, but I think and I know we'll get into some more concrete examples in the questions that Winston and Guled have prepared, and some community questions. So I think with that, Winston, when you're ready, Winston and Guled, when you're ready, we're ready to proceed.
Sure. Thanks. So thanks again for everybody who's joining us. Just a reminder of ground rules. Please enter any questions that you want to submit to the group via the chat to Guled or myself. Now I think, Guled, you're going to be asking our first question. So you're up, my friend.
All right. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much, Fiona, and everybody to attend this Transit Justice Equity meeting. So my first question to you, Fiona, is what is your position regarding muni fare increases? Are there funding mechanisms you would oppose?
I think everyone knows that. I think it's common knowledge that MTA is going to be facing some serious budget considerations, and we're all going to have some serious in thinking about how we move forward as an agency, making sure we stay solvent. But I think that there are some hopefully creative solutions. I know that we undertook a lot of advocacy on the community side to not do the fare increases last time. And I know, for example, Supervisor Preston's office was even pre-COVID on a path to hoping that Muni would be a free sort of public good for all of San Francisco. But I think that there are some creative ways that we can look at raising raising some revenue for the agency, but I do recognize that that the MTA will have is experiencing right now a severe budget shortfall and will continue to do so. But I hope that a fair and equitable solution can be reached so that hopefully we can use fare increases as a last resort for um, money for the agency. And also we need to factor in that who's riding Muni in COVID times, right? So our ridership is down, so we're not even bringing in the money at the current fares. So I think there's room there to help us sort of think creatively on the fare increase part, on the fare increase issue. But it will continue to be an issue as MTA continues to go through their a sort of budget crisis, as the city continues to go through its budget crisis, really.
And thank you very much for that. And just a follow-up question from the Transit Justice Coalition is we would like to know your perspective on operator wages and your commitment to working with our communities to create livable wages for our operators and mechanics to ensure that they could also afford to live in the city they serve.
Real quick, sorry to interrupt you all. I just wanted to check in. We've been having some technical issues. Caina and Joey, I just wanted to make sure that everything was going well with them.
Okay.
Maybe they can give me a thumbs up. All right, cool. Sorry about that.
No, thank you for confirming, Winston.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No problem. We want this event to be linguistically accessible, and our interpreters are doing yeoman's work, I'm sure. So
Yes.
as far as the operators go, I think we should first do everything in our power to try to avoid and delay any layoffs of drivers before thinking about the wages. But I think that obviously being a Muni driver and being a Muni operator and maintenance worker are both key parts of Muni and are both essential workers. So I think that work should be respected. And I think hopefully one of the silver linings to this pandemic in general is an appreciation for essential workers like community drivers and like transit operators who put themselves on the line every day. And yeah, and I know that this Tuesday at the board meeting when they were when the board was reviewing their sort of agency-wide equity plan, definitely their drivers from underserved and marginalized communities, they were saying that was going to be a priority of theirs. So when confirmed to the board, I think that I would like to see the plan that they outlined on Tuesday actually implemented and make sure that their Office of Racial Equity is fully staffed and they respect all of their drivers and operators and really frontline workers, including the maintenance workers that you referenced.
Thank you so much, Fiona. And thank you for those questions, Guled. I believe we have up next Pyra with Senior Disability Action.
Okay, hold on as I admit somebody in. Okay. How you doing, Fiona?
Good, how are you, Pi?
I have no idea. Really, I don't. I got two questions for you. So let's start out with, based on your vast experience with paratransit, what issues are you looking forward to address while on the SFMTA board, and why?
Pi always has the best backgrounds. I'm in a lot of meetings with Pi, and I always comment on his backgrounds. The big bugaboo with paratransit really is driver retention, because that's very intertwined with our reliability, as you know, from your experience working with paratransit. In the very early days, we've had some terrible reliability issues, and then driver training. One of SDA's members in particular was run over by a paratransit vehicle. So really making sure that they're trained up in their safety protocol, which I know that TransDev is taking more seriously these days, but really making sure that, like Goulet was asking me about earlier, with community operators, that that the paratransit drivers have a livable wage, and also a wage that they want to keep driving for paratransit. A lot of the paratransit drivers that I have ridden with and that have driven me say that they want to become a muni operator. Now, they may have various reasons for that, but I think that we want to make paratransit, for the community that we serve, we want to make paratransit an attractive job too, rather than just having them all want to jump ship for muni necessarily. So.
Okay, and finally, on the second question, as you know, being in part of paratransit, that over 50% of the rides provided in paratransit are done by taxi cabs. In fact, if it wasn't for the taxi cab industry, paratransit probably would not have existed, because they gave us not only great service, but great discounts in the very beginning years. And so basically now even before the pandemic, we've been, the taxi industry has been having a lot of problems keeping the drivers, the Uber and Lyft, invading into their territory. So from that perspective, about all the work that the taxi cabs are doing for paratransit, what steps would you like the SFMTA to take to support the cab industry?
Well, I know that for example, relating to accessible taxis, or what we call ramp taxis, one of the issues for years has always been the ability or lack of ability to get a accessible taxi in the community, and I know that MTA has put together some pretty good incentive packages. I think that one of the issues with the taxi company industry is that it's a very divisive and complicated, their relationship with the MTA board might not be the best, and they might not feel heard by the MTA board. So one of the things that I hope to do is really sort of build sort of my own relationships with them, and sort of make sure that they're heard at our MTA board meetings, and make highlight for my other board colleagues that they are taxis are really a key to accessible transit, particularly with the the advent during the pandemic of the ETC card. And Pi knows this because he's been involved in some ETC. ETC is a central trip card for those who don't know, and it's basically a $60 allotment for travel in a cab for folks who don't know. It's a really good service. So that, but I've heard that as you have, that on the whole people like it, but it needs, the allotment needs to be increased. So I think, and I know there's movement afoot within the MTA to do that. So I think prioritizing the essential trip card would be one thing that I would do.
Thank you very much.
No problem.
Thank you, Pyra. Thank you, Fiona. Let's keep moving. I'm also just wanting to be considerate of our time. So I know we have a few other organizations that are participating that might have had more than a couple of questions, but just to make sure we get to as many folks or as many of these organizational questions as possible before moving on to the community segment, if we can just limit ourselves to 2 questions per organization as we continue. And up next, I have Wendy Aragon. Wendy, thank you for joining us.
Hi, Fiona, how are you? So we have a couple of questions from the Richmond District Democratic Club. San Francisco, Sunset, and Richmond District have a growing population of older adults. Please describe your West Side transportation mobility vision, especially as it relates to the often unreliable and limited north-south transit, bike, and auto connections.
I'm sorry, which Democratic Club are you with?
Richmond District.
Oh, okay. So I do think that the west side of the city is an underserved area of the city, particularly the Sunset, right? I mean, the Richmond, at least we have the Geary corridor, but the Sunset is really underserved. And I think that also we need to look at all of our options. So even like I mentioned, looking at the EPC card, looking at possibly for our older adults, looking at possible alternatives, and just in the COVID restoration, really looking at the west side of the city, as well as underserved communities, in deciding when and where to bring back the lines. So I think looking at that is definitely a thing to do, and also looking at where our transit corridors are and where we can really network for folks. And I mean, for example, the transit riders have a goal where you can get anywhere in the city on Muni in 30 minutes. That's not happening right now because it's not, the city's just not well connected in terms of transit. You can't get from the Sunset to the downtown without having to make like 3 different transfers on the buses. So also improving the reliability of Muni. So bringing back and making sure that we have the capacity to do that is going to be critical as we move forward.
Great. You ready for the second question?
Sure.
All right. Are there any intersections between race, class, gender, ability, and more that you think that the agency could better serve, and how?
I think that in serving both its community, in serving its communities of concern, which which encapsulates some of what you stated, but not all. So again, looking at that, really the service map and where those people are, and really concentrating our efforts in when we talk about expanding. So expanding not just Muni lines and not just them coming back, but this whole concept of new mobility. So scooters, bike shares, those aren't the most popular things in the senior and disability community. I'll grant you that. But in looking at those new mobility options, looking where we can engage folks and give those folks those opportunities to use them if they do work for them as viable options, that's a great thing. And also, I think from a perspective of an advocate, again, I think the outreach that MTA does, we could always do better with our outreach. So actually going to the places where the underserved folks live and the folks that can't necessarily go to an MTA board meeting or call into an MTA board meeting or go to a workshop or do participate in open houses. So thinking creatively about going to a single room occupancy hotel, for example, going to, I don't know, a Chinese New Year celebration to get to the Chinese community. I know that that's, in a way, outreach is easier during COVID, but in-person outreach is impossible. And as I had talked about in my forum with the transit riders about an hour ago, one of the things that COVID has really highlighted is the digital divide. So trying to think of ways that people can access information about MTA without necessarily having to need a computer, like, for example, using community-based organizations to help get the most recent, the most up-to-date information out about MTA. All right.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Wendy, for those questions. We really appreciate it. All right. And so up next, we have Peter Miller from the Taxi Workers Alliance. Thank you for joining and participating, Peter.
Thanks, Carlos. Thanks, Fiona. It's nice to meet you. I appreciate what you said about wanting to develop your own relationship with the taxi industry. I think there are a lot of taxi workers that would be, well, eager for that. I have two questions for you tonight. The first one is the San Francisco City Charter states that San Francisco is a transit-first city and includes taxi cabs in the definition of transit. What do you think of taxis as part of the city's public transit system?
So I think for folks, I think that it is a viable option for folks. I know that taxis have been sort of marginalized themselves by the prevalence of Uber and Lyft in our city, but I talked about the digital divide earlier, or lack of access to Ubers and Lyfts for communities. So if someone doesn't have a smartphone, they can't use Uber and Lyft. Or if someone's got a disability, if someone uses a wheeled power chair like I do, they can't access an Uber or Lyft because Uber and Lyft don't have reliable wheelchair accessible vehicles. So for those folks in particular that want to go door to door with that are not paratransit eligible and can't take community, taxis or something that folks should be able to really rely on and are needed. And we talked about wages earlier. Taxis need to survive too, you know. I'll try to.
Right. And my second question actually really is about wages and the reaction to Uber and Lyft. Uber and Lyft have flooded the streets with an excessive amount of vehicles providing taxi services, devastating taxi operator income. Taxi operators who purchased a $250,000 medallion, the license to operate a taxi cab, are facing foreclosure and going bankrupt. What do you think can be done to help all transit operators, including taxi operators, make an equitable living?
I mentioned earlier about at least the wheelchair accessible, the taxi incentives, and I know that taxis, I think, need to be incentivized to make trips out in the community. So what I mean by that is I know that a lot of taxis and taxi drivers, they like to hang out at the airport because you used to need you need a taxi to go home, but you've got all your luggage, and those fares tend to be pretty lucrative in San Francisco because the airport is a long way away from most places. So I think we need to think about incentivizing taxi usage, taxi trips and taxi usage in the community itself. So.
Okay, thanks a lot, Fiona.
All right.
All right, and thank you, Peter, for those questions. We really appreciate it. Next on the list, I have taking off his moderator hat for a minute, but his message board is still open to send while he'll be asking the questions. But we have Winston Parsons from the Richmond Senior Center, but please still feel free to message him and Guled your questions that you may have. And that, Winston.
Thanks, Carlos. So for everybody who doesn't know me, I'm Community Engagement Specialist at the Richmond Senior Center at Geary and 26th Avenue. So Fiona, my first question is, the current process for requesting curb colors, blue, yellow, white, and green, requires anyone who isn't a child care center, including senior serving nonprofits, to apply for a permit that can cost thousands of dollars per year. This has proven to be an obstacle to expanding passenger loading and disabled parking zones. What would you support, or would you support changing this system? And if yes, what would be some ideas that you have to improve it?
You know, I haven't really delved into that. However, I do know that blue zone parking in particular is at a premium in the city for a whole lot of reasons, including that there just aren't enough spaces. So I think I would support possibly some sort of reform to that process, and for folks who need, for example, loading zones for various things, that like you said, creates a barrier. But I don't think I have a specific answer in terms of how exactly I would approach that in terms of an actual concrete plan.
Got it. Thanks. My second question is, as mentioned earlier, taxis are an integral part of paratransit, especially in the wake of Prop 22 passing at the state level. How would you feel about the city potentially supporting some sort of unified taxi cooperative with an app integrated into Muni Mobile and perhaps using the city's mobility management center for dispatch
Yeah.
or similar.
So I think that the city has tried to do this in terms of like sort of an app conglomerate kind of thing with the flywheel app and that thing and such things. But I think that in terms of an app that you're proposing, Winston, that would be a great boon for for folks. Muni Mobile is like Muni's app for those who may not know. And then using the Mobility Management Center for dispatching, that also sounds like an potentially appealing thing, although IT solutions take a while, and also I mentioned before the digital divide, so it would have to also be like a phone number that you might need to call, but I'm all for integrating the complex bureaucracy, not just for MTA, but for the rest of the city. So, yeah.
Got it. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Winston, for sharing those questions. We have two more, and then we will be moving into the community question segment of tonight's event. But before we do that, it's a pleasure to introduce Nick Alston from Bicis del Pueblo. Nick, thank you for joining us.
I wasn't anticipating that. Hey, how's it going?
Hey.
So I do a question now.
Yep.
Sorry, I'm obviously in hour 12 of 48 of work.
Great.
I think kind of two-part question on the same topic of equity. One, the announcement on Tuesday of a new position, executive position. That's what my question was actually going to be about. But I wanted to know what your impressions of the new, I forget what it's called, equity initiative.
Office of Equity.
Yeah, but at the executive level. So it would be what you would like to see from that position. Like, what are the things that you think that person should be tackling, and what type of teeth should that position really hold? And then go ahead.
Go ahead.
And then the second question on the back of that question is also the the equity group. Who would you want to see added to that group, the existing group that advises the SFMTA?
I think that, so I'll take your first question first. I think I want to see that person hired there, which it looks like should be happening kind of soon. Well, at least interviews have started. And I think that there was, I'm not going to say appetite, but I think that there was some interest on the board, at least on Tuesday, from the board, at least on Tuesday, about seeing that whoever that person is have some sort of a staff, so it's not just them. So based on looking at the budget constraints, if that is possible, I think that would be a good I think that would be a good first step. At the executive level, and I think Director Tumwin mentioned this also at the Tuesday meeting, is making sure that folks actually go to the various folks in management actually go to the various affinity groups that MTA has going for the folks, so that the workers themselves actually feel heard, and I would like to see that also that person's work is elevated to a high standard and a high place in the agency. And I think that that's one of the things that we're going to be making sure happens on the board. And I think that just making sure that some of the other parts of the plan are fully implemented, like the competency training, looking at potential like restorative discipline for drivers that might need that. So I think that it's a really good plan that MTA put together. Now I think we need to see it implemented, and I think making sure that all underserved communities are represented in that group that you mentioned in your second question would be a key to that. So making sure we have representatives from both the racially marginalized communities, but also older adults and adults with disabilities in those communities would be a key to making sure that that plan actually happens.
Thank you. I appreciate your response.
Thank you, Nick, for sharing those questions with us this evening. And we saved the best for last. We have Laura Sinai from the People's Congress who've been able to join us tonight with their questions over in the Tenderloin. So Laura, please take it away. Thank you for joining us. I believe you might be muted.
You could put your question maybe in the chat box too, if that works.
She submitted one, I think, in advance, so I can enter that or potentially read it on Laura's behalf while she navigates the technical details. How does that sound?
Sure.
Oh, there we go.
All
Looks like she's
right.
unmuted. All right, Laura, just in time.
I'd like to know about the equity for the Tenderloin and your views about transit equity, real equity in the Tenderloin
Did
for our neighborhood.
Did you have a specific question, or did you just want me to respond to that statement?
Yes, please.
Okay. I'll take that as sort of a way to cover everything, right? So I think that the Tenderloin is obviously a key of actually since the start of the pandemic. I think in the short term, right, it's making sure that the 27 Bryant is restored. Hopefully sooner rather than later, that gets back again to the rail part, because SFMTA is saying that the 27 Bryant will get back as soon as the rail comes, but no one really knows when the rail's going to come back. And I know that, for example, that there are also some, we haven't really talked about Vision Zero and Vision Zero goals too much yet in this particular event, but I know that there are some quick build projects that are scheduled to get going soon here, and holding MTA accountable to some of the timelines that they've laid out for the Tenderloin is going to be key. They seem committed to it, but making sure that they're actually held accountable in what they say to the public, which is really, I think, a thing that I would push for, not just in Tenderloin equity, but for all of the work that I do on the MTA board, is for it to be transparent and making sure that people like the residents of the Tenderloin, like all the residents, all the San Franciscans that are represented by the agencies served on this, that are served by the agencies represented on this call, make sure that they know that the MTA is here for them, and make sure that they have opportunities to hold MTA really accountable. Getting back to your Tenderloin question, I think getting really a neighborhood plan for both Vision Zero and equitable transit in the Tenderloin would be a good thing to do, and would probably be a priority of mine on the board to push for. So that's kind of, we could have a whole conversation about the Tenderloin, but yeah.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, Laura, for the question. Really appreciate your participation and joining us here tonight. With that, I really want to thank all of the organizations that have participated, and also for your organization's service to the communities that we're privileged to be able to work and collaborate with. But with this piece, I think that we've been able to cover all of the organizational questions. I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to my fellow moderators, Winston and Guled, who have been taking your questions all evening, and open it up for this community question part of the segment. All right, thank you so much. And with that, Guled, Winston, feel free to take it away.
Right on. Well, before we get started with the community questions here, I'd like to remind everybody of the ground rules. Firstly, just introduce yourself, the organization or neighborhood you're from, and ask your question that's transit related. And once again, for sake of time, if you could be considerate by being concise with your questions, you will see me and my man Winston will do this signal to wrap it up if it's a bit long-winded. I know it's a really passionate conversation that we're having with Fiona. And then use the raise hand function, or send me or Winston a private message with your questions so we can get you on stack. And lastly, once again, it's a family-friendly event. We got our bouncer, Pyra, who will automatically mute you out if there's any profanities or unsafe language occurs during the Q&A. So with that being said, we're gonna just kick off one of the questions here from, I believe, yeah,
Bob Planthold. So Bob, if you can unmute yourself, we're ready for you.
Hi, this is Bob Planthold. I've been a longtime member of various advisory committees to Muni, Caltrain, Paratransit, BART, and so forth. Fiona, my question is, do you have any plans or willingness to look at the training of operators for making sure that they help the many people with mobility disabilities get a seat? Because 90% of those who have a mobility disability do not use wheelchairs, but we use braces, crutches, walkers, and so forth. And I will say I find, and I notice when others get on, operators leave us alone to find a seat now.
Bob, you're going to have to wrap it up. Sorry to cut you.
So that's like, what do you think about training for operators to make sure that 90% of mobility disability people get a seat?
I know where you're going with the question, so, and thanks for the question. So I saw this myself when sometimes drivers would agree to tie down my chair, and sometimes I would have to yell at them to do it themselves or come and help me do it. So I would definitely, I hate to use the term sensitivity training, but make sure that, I mean, I'm sure it's in Muni's policies somewhere, but to make sure that that actually gets enforced and have drivers all go through like a almost mandatory training where they work with the disability community and folks like yourself who use other types of mobility aids, and they go through a crowded bus and they make sure that they help the folks, you know, maybe get a seat and also are receptive to feedback, and also can make sure that each rider, if you encounter a driver who doesn't get a seat, make sure that they know the process to file a complaint and how to do that, and hopefully assert themselves to.
Okay.
Next up, we got Janice Lee. If you can unmute yourself, that would be great.
Thank you for joining us tonight, Janice.
Oh, Janice might have stepped away, but I'm willing to bet she'll be joining us, and so we can come back to her. While Janice is returning, up next is Herbert Weiner. Herbert, you've got 30 seconds, sir. Take it away.
Hi, my major concern is that seniors and the disabled are required to walk up to a quarter of a mile to the bus stop. And it is very cruel to do this. And I feel that seniors and the disabled have targets on their back. They're given the least concern by MTA, and there should be at least parity with bicycle riders. So what are you going to do to rectify this? It's systematic. The latest atrocity is 19th Avenue.
Yeah, I think this is why there always is a person with a disability on the board, and you know, you remember that I come from a policy background, engagement. I seem to be echoing a bit there, but all right. In community engagement background, so I think really listening to the community and listening to their concerns, but also, like I said, looking, because the MTA handles a lot, right? The MTA handles the fixed route, but also Vision Zero and a lot of the pedestrian safety work. So I think looking at all those from a disability and senior lens, but also recognizing that there is gonna be times when we as the MTA have policies that the senior and disability community may disagree with. I know because I've had some in my day job. So I think when that happens, we need to really listen to the advocacy community and really take their views into account before we make a decision. So I hope that I'm able to bring some representation, not only from my own personal experience as a person with a disability, but also the rest of the community at large.
Thanks. I think we have up next, well, let's check in with Janice and see if she's back. Janice, are you there? All right. If not,
I can send her an email.
Yeah, I might actually have her number so I can text her, give her a poke. Up next then, after Janice, was going to be Eric Leo and Luca Fjorg. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name.
No problem, it's Ferg.
Ferg.
My question is about accessing Golden Gate Park. We just trying to take our children across Fulton to, bike and ride or walk around is really harrowing. What do we do to make it safer for the citizens of San Francisco to get to our great places?
So that's kind of a general question. Is there a specific question you had about going about security
about crossing Fulton?
In the context of Golden Gate Park, I'm assuming. So I know that accessing Golden Gate Park particularly is like you said, a harrowing experience. So I would make sure that that everyone could, and that I know that SFMTA is undertaking a working group to particularly address the closure of JFK Drive, and also we as the disability community have all concerns about JFK Drive and paratransit access in particular. So that is definitely something that needs looking at, and making sure that everybody has a say in how that whole process rolls out. So.
Thanks. Janice, are you there? Or should I skip ahead? All right.
I just send it in.
So
before Winston, Liliana, Joey, and Caina, if any of our
right,
Chinese speaking attendees in this event have a question, feel free to let them know to chime in.
And I'm assuming that question would be voiced in English if
Absolutely, unless you're a jack of all trades, Fiona.
I was just wondering technically how to do it.
Great. Our next question that was submitted, but the individual can't ask it live, was by Eugene Greger. His question was, how would you propose maintaining and advancing projects like the Great Walkway in the Sunset while addressing related traffic safety concerns?
Yeah, I saw in the paper that this is a challenge. So I think, because with closures, right, it's like with the closure of Market Street, the traffic moves to other areas, right? So it's really looking at where we go where the residents of our city go, and how we can make this a really friendly city to get around, whether that's using their public transit, whether that's using a personal car, whether that's using a bike share, whether that's using a scooter. So really looking at various ways to get around, and really taking the time to assess various impacts of moving. Well, before we make a decision about closures of roads permanently or for an extended period of time, really looking at the impact and making sure that everybody can get everywhere they need to go, as particularly taking into account those folks who might use a certain part of the city that not everyone uses, but that's in particular a lifeline for a particular community, for example. So really looking at the impacts of road closures and associated street closures in an equitable sense.
Right on. Next, we have Sue Vaughn on Stack. Sue, thank you for joining. Feel free to ask your question.
Okay, hi everybody. Fiona, thank you so much for being here and agreeing to do this. So my name is Sue Vaughn, and I've been working on the whole issue of our public infrastructure for about 6 years, and sort of the kind of quietly giving that infrastructure away despite state and local laws that are very explicit that say you cannot do that. So my question, state and local laws restrict access to public bus stops and transit only red lanes to public transit only vehicles. Tech shuttles, casino buses, tour buses, Academy of Art buses,
So you're
the
going to have to
now
wrap it up.
okay,
And
are not public transit vehicles. What is your position? What do you think? Public bus stops, transit only red lanes.
I think that we need to take a hard look at our commuter shuttle program, particularly in light of the fact that during COVID, people aren't really going to a physical office, much less commuting a far distance where they would necessarily necessitate a commuter shuttle. And who knows when that's ever going to happen again. And they do take up public bus stops, but again, there are some folks who will rely on the commuter shuttle. So, but I do think we need to take a hard look at things like our commuter shuttle program and our use of our perhaps too liberal use of the transit only lanes.
All right. Thank you for asking the question, Sue, and thank you for answering, Fiona. Next, we got Wendy Aragon. Wendy.
Wendy, are you there? All right, well, I can potentially ask Wendy's question, which she sent me if she is not present. So the other question that one of the Richmond Dem Club's members submitted was, sometimes it seems that agencies like the SFMTA plan different projects in the same neighborhood without coordinating them, or that they are not planned in a comprehensive manner. How would you propose or what that be addressed in a better way? And would you support proposals for a dedicated liaison from the SFMTA to each supervisor's district?
I think so. Coordination within any large bureaucracy is a task that needs to be done, but there are a lot of city agencies that aren't necessarily very good at it. One of the things about COVID is that I hope that some city agencies are becoming better at talking to each other due to the fact that we've had to do a lot of sort of interagency collaboration in our COVID recovery. So I would support also MTA making sure that sort of not only each project team coordinates with each other, but MTA has a lot of different divisions and is a very complicated bureaucracy. So even making sure those division heads talk to each other and their staff talk to each other. I think the idea of a district liaison is a good one, particularly to address some of the constituent concerns so that they feel like they have a direct line to the MTA and thus the MTA board.
Thank you for that. All right, I just wanted to ask Janice's question. and that is SFMTA does regularly deploy fare inspectors. What's your opinion of them, and do you think they increase safety of the system?
Sorry, I missed the key word there.
Right. So let me repeat the question again. SFMTA does regularly deploy fare inspectors. What's your opinion of them, and do you think they increase safety of the system?
I think that they are used. I think that a lot of people feel that they target certain lines and target neighborhoods that folks of color and folks from underrepresented communities live in. So I think a lot of people feel that it's more of like racial targeting. I think that that's somewhat of the, and also income based. They're on lines that serve like low income neighborhoods. So I think that that's the common opinion. That's a common opinion of them. Do they increase safety and lack of fare evasion? I think that in those certain areas, I think that our fare inspector program could be should be looked at so that people don't feel like it's something that's attacking their neighborhood or their particular community that they come from. So, and I think that there are other ways to keep communities safe rather than necessarily using fare inspectors. I think that they're an option, but I think that there are other ways to keep the system safe.
Got it. We have some more time remaining, and so I just wanted to check in with folks. Please raise your hand or send Goulet or myself a question if you've got another question. In the meantime, we had some other questions in the wings to potentially ask you, Fiona. One was from the Richmond Senior Center was, do you see any barriers via language access that the SFMTA could address and better engage and support non-English speakers in San Francisco?
I think language access is something we could always get better at. I was impressed that this event was interpreted, but the city has five threshold languages that they have to have most of their minimum material in. But I think that the SFMTA could do better at that, but also expanding beyond the threshold languages to make sure that if we're looking in a neighborhood, if that particular neighborhood has a high prevalence of people that speak a certain language, making sure that signage in whatever that language is produced. And I also know that you, particularly Winston, have been very frustrated at times with the lack of language access in paratransit. So I think that that's something also that needs to be looked at.
Thank you. All right. We're going to make our last call for questions, and then I think we might even have a moment or two for Fiona to give a closing statement if you'd like, and then we'll bid everybody adieu. Last call, any questions? If I don't see any, we might carve out some time for Fiona to make a closing statement. And Carlos, am I going out of order or forgetting anything here?
No, please. A closing statement would be great. Yeah,
All right.
if you have one, Fiona, and if not, we can work to wrap this up.
So I think that in, I guess, closing, I would, my main goals for the MTA for my tenure on the board would be looking at everything through a senior and disability lens, making sure that everything is accessible both to linguistically as well as programmatically and physically when you think about the ADA, but really going beyond that and really making sure that our communities of concern are met and also are heard and feel like they're actually making an impact and change in the system. So making sure that the input of various community groups is actually heard and there's a forum to do that for folks, and also increasing the transparency of the MTA to the public, so that I think we all acknowledge that the MTA has a lot of work to do to sort of rebuild their public image, and that's one of the things that I think I would be committed to doing. So I think that if you guys want to wrap it up, this would be a good time.
Good time to step in. All right, let's go ahead and do that. Again, just to remind folks that this Zoom meeting was recorded. We're going to be posting it up on our Transit Justice Coalition Facebook page. Please go on there and like us, follow us, watch the recording again if you'd like, share it with your friends. Again, just really want to give a special thank you to Fiona for joining us here tonight, for helping us begin and groundbreak this process. And again, also like Fiona had mentioned, it's really hard to create openings in our language access. So to Caina, to Liliana, and to Joey, thank you all three of you so much for lending us your services tonight, making this as available and accessible as possible. We couldn't have done this without you. To our partners, the People's Congress, Bicis del Pueblo, Richmond Senior Center, the Richmond Democratic Club, the Senior Disability Action, Taxi Workers Alliance. I want to thank all of you for participating, for joining us tonight, for making this event so meaningful. And most of all, to all of you, to everyone here watching this video, thank you again for taking this critical step with us to establish an equitable process where the voices and the needs of communities of color and other marginalized communities are not only heard, but again, prioritized. The Futures Horizons getting a little bit more brighter and colorful tonight for this event that we put together, all of us. So we hope to catch you all at our next town hall event on December 10th, where we will be sitting down to talk with SFMTA board nominee Manny Yucatel. We look forward to seeing you all there. Please visit our Facebook page for updates on that. And again, thank you everybody for joining us here tonight. It's been a pleasure to sit here and talk transit with you all. Thank you, Fiona. Let's
Thank you.
wrap it up. All right, thank you guys.
Well, thanks everybody.
Thank you. That was excellent.
Take care.